Hello and welcome. My name is Dave Carson and welcome to Free the Mind UK, a chat with a therapist. I'm really excited about this evening. It's going to be a very informative, interesting chat with a Vedic astrologist called Richard Fidler. Now, Richard is a professional astrologer and teacher. His career started around the mid-90s, at which point he became interested in Vedic Jyotish astrology. His work has been published in the Mountain Astrologer, the the Astrological Journal, and even the Business Insider. Basically, all in all, Richard really knows his stuff, and we're really pleased to have him on tonight as our guest. I'm also going to be joined by Dani, my co-host. But before we begin our chat, we're going to play the intro video, and then we'll be back.
Not sure what therapy to choose? Free the Mind UK presents A Chat with a Therapist. Join us live for an up-close informal discussion of the various holistic therapies available, helping you make that important choice.
Okay, guys, I don't know what happened to the intro video there. Might be my internet. Welcome, Richard. Welcome to Free the Mind UK Chat with a Therapist. Really great to have you on. Welcome, Dani.
Hiya.
Thank you so much, Dave. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people. We've already got people watching now. They're going to be very interested in what you've got to say. And for the people who are watching now, if you've got any questions for Richard, just post them and I'll put them on the screen so Richard can answer them. So, Richard, we start off with how did you manage to get into this subject and so many years ago?
Believe it or not, I'm actually quite a skeptic, and I was in my teens, and someone asked me what my sign was, and I said, "Surely you don't believe in that stuff? How can there be 12 kinds of people?" And then this person explained that when you calculate a full astrological chart, it incorporates the positions of all the different planets and so on. And I wasn't aware of that. And that explanation, gave me this. I had a little vision in that moment of the solar system, and I knew just enough about the planets and their cycles to realize that an astrological birth chart would be as unique as a fingerprint. And then that got me really intrigued, and I started reading whatever I could find about it. And then, after a while, I was telling friends, I just looked up your stuff, and I see you've got blank, Mars and whatever. And then eventually people started commissioning me to create reports for them, and it just organically grew. And then at some point I realized it looks like I'm an astrologer.
Wow. And did you start off, Richard, with the what you would call the tropical aspect of astrology, which is the Western type of astrology, isn't it? And then did you then go into the Vedic side of things? And
Yes.
What I was going to ask you as well, the other part of the question was what made you go into the Vedic side?
And what's the difference?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Those are good questions. Well, yes, I did start out with the regular Western astrology. You could call it tropical astrology, or the astrology that uses what is called, properly speaking, the tropical zodiac. That's the zodiac most people would be familiar with Aries, the sun entering Aries on the 21st of March and all of that. So I'd been doing that for a few years, and I was doing charts for people, and it seemed to be working well and so on. And then I met some people who were doing transcendental meditation, and as you know, among the courses they offer, or supplementary courses, was Jyotish, and there were some Indian astrologers who were coming to the area connected to that organization, and I was hearing a little bit about it from them, and I remember them saying, "Well, there's this other zodiac, and you won't be a Libra, you'll be a Virgo." And I said, "Obviously, I'm not a Virgo."
So like the Mayan calendar.
No, this is the Vedic sidereal zodiac, right?
Okay.
And it gets a little bit technical if we had to get into what the difference is, because this is the first difference people will encounter if they start looking into Vedic astrology.
Well, because September is September is the 7th month, and October is the 8th month.
All right.
Because
I think what you're referring to there is more the way the original sort of Roman calendrical system got adjusted at some point. So that's a slightly different issue.
so it goes further back then.
You see, what happens is, that they say that in Western astrology that the sun enters Aries on the 21st of March or the 20th of March, right? Now, the sun doesn't enter Aries on the 21st of March, because remember, the 21st of March, 20th or 21st of March is the equinox, right? So the equinox is actually the point along the ecliptic that the sun is located at on the 20th of March. That point is taken as the first degree of Aries, and it's projected.
So that's the first month.
The first month, yes, or the first zodiac sign, right? And of course the months. This is why we have 12 months, because the idea of a month was originally, sort of based on this division of the cycle of the year by 12. And so, as I was saying, with the tropical zodiac used in Western astrology, the equinox is the anchor that determines where the zodiac signs are located. Many people assume that when we talk about the constellation of Aries or Taurus, the actual star grouping there, that's what is meant, but that's not what is meant. Okay. The actual tropical zodiac is not something that's in any way visible. It's a division of that ecliptic circle into 12 equal spaces, using the sun's position at the equinox as the starting point. Now, in Vedic or Hindu or Indian astrology, they use what is called the sidereal zodiac, and that uses specific stars that are linked to the constellations, right? And so basically your Vedic chart and the planets, the signs your planets will be in your Vedic chart will accord much more with what you would see in the night sky in terms of the actual constellations. Now, there's something called the precession of the equinoxes. And when they say that we're in the age of Pisces moving into the age of Aquarius, what we're actually talking about there is a relationship between the tropical and sidereal zodiacs.
Okay.
That the difference between them is not constant. It moves very, very gradually. It shifts at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And in about sort of 24,000 years, you have a complete revolution. So basically, when we say this is the age of Pisces now, the reason we're saying that is because that point where the sun enters Aries or at the equinox is in the constellation of Pisces.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So look, this is a little technical, but it would be a little easier to explain to people with some images. But basically, to cut a long story short, the difference between Western and Vedic astrology, well, the most immediate difference is the fact that most of the planets in your Western chart will move back one sign. And I remember when I was initially studying regular Western astrology, being puzzled by some charts, like among them the chart of Hitler. I thought, how is this person a Taurus? This just doesn't, and not just the sun sign. There were other things too that just didn't make sense. When you converted to the Vedic version, suddenly he's an Aries. And that means, blitzkrieg. It means charged. I mean, another example would be Nikola Tesla, who to use very simple sun sign astrology, is a Cancerian in Western astrology, becomes Gemini in the Vedic system, right? So is actually Sun in Cancer with Moon in Libra in the Western system. So, a Western astrologer doing a reading for him would have said, oh, you're a real homebody. You love nothing more than marital life and all of that kind of thing. Whereas in the Vedic system, his Sun in Gemini with Moon in Virgo, which means you're a very curious person, a tinkerer, a very precise, analytical person, which is far more accurate. So, it took me a few years of being confused about this and looking at hundreds and hundreds of charts before I came to the conclusion for myself, at least, that the sidereal zodiac works.
I actually watched one of your videos with a gentleman, and you were talking about Hitler's sign using the Vedic system, and it better described warmongering and all that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, it's one of my well, I suppose, favorite examples, but perhaps also because it was one of the first charts that really puzzled me. And why it's important is because, if this astrology stuff is really going to be so useful, it should help us to understand people who've left a big mark on history.
Yeah,
It
definitely.
shouldn't be difficult to unravel it, you know.
Mm.
And so it's, you know, it's not like you can say, oh well, that's okay, that one didn't work. No, you know, those important figures of history in particular should make sense.
But that's why there's so many different avenues to make it confusing, so that they can discredit things, so that the right way, when you say no, this is the correct way, you know, it's the same with many. We can go down many rabbit holes of that.
Well, you know, I think maybe along the lines that you're referring to there, Dani, you know, astrology in the West a few hundred years ago almost disappeared, because, you know, astrology in a sense fell through the crack that was left when religion and science separated, because astrology is partly religion and partly science, you might say. You know, it addresses both of those realms. And
definitely.
And one of the things is the unique things about astrology in India is that there it has never suffered from this ostracism from regular society and culture, and it's an integral part of the religion and all of that sort of thing. And you know, for that reason, it could be said that there are certain parts of Western astrology that maybe you know, the whole system of Western astrology that the way Western astrology looked in the 20th century was a caricature of what it used to be many centuries previously. And so Vedic astrology, in a sense, inspired,
it's the ancient form.
It's a more ancient form, and the West's exposure to Vedic astrology in recent decades actually was part of what spurred certain Western scholars to go much more deeply into the more ancient versions of Western astrology. And so there's been in recent decades something of a revival of interest, not only in ancient systems like the Vedic system, but even the more ancient versions of Western astrology.
Well, it says that, doesn't it? And even in I mean, if we're going to go religious here, I'm just saying, in the Book of Revelations, it says knowledge will be made broad.
Right.
If you've got the eyes to see, go and have a look.
I was going to ask you that actually, but you know, like if it's progressively being more popular in the West.
Yes, that's definitely been the case. You know, I think I was probably among the earlier groups of Western astrologers who started exploring Vedic astrology, because it was really only in the 1990s that you started to get really accessible, well-written, and you know, really useful books in English on Vedic astrology.
Yeah,
and you know, I was fortunate to encounter those books around 1995 or 6 or so. But you know, these days, in I would say in the past decade or so, more and more Western astrologers are realizing that there's a lot of value in Vedic astrology, and there has, you know, some have or were initially quite wary of it, perceiving this as a bit of an outsider, so to speak, and feeling that, you know, it shouldn't interfere with Western astrology's approach. But you know, when you really get into Western and Vedic astrology, you see that it's essentially the same system. It's the 12 signs of the zodiac have the same symbolism, broadly the same meanings. They're located in different places for technical reasons, but they're ruled by the same planets. The houses mean broadly the same thing, even though they're calculated slightly differently. So what Western and Vedic astrology are essentially twins separated at birth, you know, and they encounter each other later on and realize, okay, you've got a few strange habits wherever you grew up, but actually you can see that we're related. You know, the common DNA is indisputable. And so, you know, I suppose if there's some niche in that I operate in the world of astrology, it's really in trying to bridge these two systems. And I often say that what is made explicit in the one system is implicit in the other, you know, and so you don't have to do violence to either system in comparing them. In fact, you don't have to, for example, convert from Western astrology to Vedic astrology to get some valuable insights from Vedic astrology that can enhance your Western astrology. And, the same is true the other way around. Western astrology, particularly in the 20th century, evolved certain specific methods that are really good, really reliable, and that Indian astrologers could learn from. And that approach specifically centers around, I want to call it a very geometric method that involves looking at, in a very precise way, at the geometric angles between the planets at birth, and then also looking at the geometric angles between where the planets are now and where you were born, and even the geometric angles between where the planets were at the births of two different people. And so when you add those together, it can become really interesting, because you can see why you have certain channels of connection with certain specific people. And also, when you do have those channels of connection with specific people, there's also a rhythm and a cyclic rhythm to that channel's activation. So you'll find that it's, if you learn to watch what's called transits, looking at how the current planets interact with birth planets, you'll see that you always meet certain people, often quite by chance, when a very particular part of the way your charts meet gets activated.
Wow, that's incredible.
I often use a certain musical analogy. You could say that every planet, the word chakra means wheel, right? Yeah. And so basically every and the planets are wheels. The solar system is a wheel, and the
resonance
planets are wheels,
and frequency,
wheels, right? And so basically each one of the planets in your chart represents a chakra, and that was set at a very specific pitch. So when we think of the 360 degrees of the zodiac as like a great grand piano, you might say, or something like that, there's 360 specific notes. So when you were born, let's say, for example, your heart chakra, just to use a simple analogy, was set at a very particular note. When the planets in their current movements send forth different frequencies or notes or vibrations, they not everybody is responding to those notes at the same time. So the moment some planet out there sends forth a frequency that is aligned to or resonates with your unique settings, just like a tuning fork, right? You can play all kinds of notes around it, nothing happens, but the moment you play the right pitch, it never fails to respond. So, this is actually very close to what's actually happening, very close to, it's a metaphor, but it's close to what's actually behind it, comes close to describing the mechanism whereby we are in this dance with the solar system, you might say.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's really good analogy.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yes, I've been studying all about frequency and vibration, and sort of like working out Genesis in a scientific way. So basically, the earth being void, formless, and darkness was across the face of the deep. And the earth is 70% water, just like the human body is 70% water. So then the Holy Spirit rushes across the face of the deep. And that is the vibration. Yeah, so you can imagine for the first time the atmosphere hitting that dark. So and also, you think of the elements that the water can be dark or light. It's transferable. Okay, so the element, it was void, formless. There were somehow 4 elements. Anyway, so the Holy Spirit is rushing across, is the vibration, yeah? Right. Then God said, let there be light, right? And as soon as those words left, and there was light, so it went right through the water. And when light is the rainbow and it hits the water, it actually transfers to the purple being the... So that was the word is the frequency. So in order for creation to begin and for the light to come, It needed the right frequency and the right vibration. So the Holy Spirit rushed across the water and created that vibration. So the water was going everywhere, swirling, or doing tidal waves, whatever it was doing. It was void, formless, dark. And then God said, let there be light. And then you had that frequency come in at the same time, and it created. Anyway, so that's.
Sorry, Richard. I was going to say what you were talking about before, like when. Yeah, okay, Dani. Fine. Like when like two people's things will be in line, they'll connect with each other. It could be business, it could be relationship, it could be whatever. So they're both sort of like vibrating at the same thing in a sense, like because of their whatever. I'm not explaining it very well, am I? But I understand what you're saying. I was going to ask you as well. About the four. Was it the four aims of life? The
right. Yes. Okay. I'll go into that in a sec. I just wanted to add on to what Dani was talking about there. Yeah. Just since she's mentioning, Genesis and the creation story, because it's quite interesting that we have this idea that God created the world in 7 days. Okay, and that on the last day, there was this day of rest and non-action. Now, you know that the days of the week are named after the planets, and they have been for a very long time, right? So Sunday is Sun's day, Monday is Moon's day, Tuesday, Monday. If you look at French or other European languages, you'll see it very clearly. And by the way, in India too, the days of the week are ruled by exactly the same planets. And this is not, this goes way back. And in the sequence of it starts with the sun and moon. The sun is the first day, right? And that's like one without two. That's
but one singular. Day is a yom, which is 1,000 years.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, there are many different ways of looking at this, but I simply wanted to just say that even the creation story of God creating the world in 7 days is an astrological allegory, because basically even the day of rest being the last day is Saturn's day. Saturn is the old man, is the stoppage, is the limitation, and all of these things. And in India, you might have heard the Vedas. They speak of the Vedas, which are these ancient writings that Hinduism, you might say, kind of spawned from or developed from. And so they often, so the Vedas have certain limbs, which they call Vedangas. The anga literally means the limb. And so these different limbs are different sciences that are needed to unlock the meaning of the Vedas. And so Jyotish, or astrology, is the eye of the Vedas. Ritual, for example, is the hand of the Vedas, and so on. And where I'm going with this in relation to this more religious context is, that is when you look at all the different places and ways astrology is brought up in the Bible, you can see that it's essentially, astrology was no different to in Western religion, or
the Virgin traversing, the Virgin that she was traversing across the sky, and the lion was the crown, and that was Leo, and it had even it's depicted the same crown, and she was birthing Jupiter or something.
Right. And you also have in more than one place in the Bible a reference to specifically these four images of the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. And,
and the bear, isn't it?
Well, no, it's those four. I think it's in Ezekiel, and I think it's also in Revelations. But anyway, those are the four fixed signs of the zodiac. Those aren't just four vaguely recognizable zodiac signs. They form a cross in the zodiac circle. And so my point was simply that I believe that astrology was, this is no surprise to most people, originally integral to culture and even the religion of the West, even as you find it now in India. And this kind of leads very aptly into this topic of the four aims of life, or the Purusharthas, as they call them. Because this idea that there are four aims of life, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, this is not astrological terminology. This is basic Vedic or Hindu philosophy. So people in India would know that these are the 4 aims of life, even if they don't know anything about astrology. But this structure of that their philosophy dovetails with the astrology very neatly. And this is how it was traditionally in all, shall I say, sophisticated cultures, because all the different sciences could speak to each other. The astrology could speak to the medicine, could speak to the philosophy, could speak to the agriculture, it could speak to the music, etc. And so when we look at a birth chart, there are 12 houses. People have often heard about the houses. Perhaps some people only have a vague idea of what that really means, but basically the houses could be described as a way of dividing the space around the Earth into 12 segments. And it takes the eastern horizon or ascendant as the anchoring point for that projection of these 12 slices. And the ascendant, therefore, is where the first house begins, and then it proceeds from there. It's putting it a bit simplistically. But now, these 4 aims of life of Indian philosophy are connected with, to some extent, the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water, because the 1st, 5th, and 9th houses correspond in a way to the fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And they are associated with the principle of Dharma. And Dharma, the context in which you'd often hear the word is truth or religion. Okay. But, what's very interesting here is if you think about the fire element, fire is very spontaneous. It's very naturally honest and it's very naturally truthful. And that spontaneity is very key, because the idea of Dharma, in a sense, represents in each individual their mission in life, their calling, what they would pursue or what they would do if they were following their true nature. Now, although there are 3 houses that are Dharma houses, each one of those represent Dharma in some specific facet. The first house is the first of the Dharma houses, and it's the very first house of all the houses, the whole sequence, and it represents selfhood in its most pure, basic form. In fact, the symbol of it could be a little baby that has just arrived naked in the world, expressing it, affirming its existence without any inhibition, any contrivance or any calculation. Okay, it's very honest. Okay, then Leo in the 5th house would represent, it's the heart, and it represents creativity, creative intelligence. It even represents romance and courtship, because we're also there trying to beam a version of ourselves to the beloved, that's very sort of essentially pure, and then finally the 9th house, which would correspond to Sagittarius, would represent the most developed form of Dharma, which would be the guru, religion, philosophy, and so on. Okay, so when we then, for example, Artha, which correspond to the earth element, would be the 2nd house, which is like Taurus, the 6th house like Virgo, and the 10th house like Capricorn. And so this triplicity, or these 3 houses in the chart, the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th, will tell us how the person, what the person's potentials are, and also perhaps their obstacles are, with the principle of material resources. Those Artha houses show us how we fulfill that aim of life. That is, having the material sustenance and support we need. So the 2nd house, the most basic one, which corresponds to Taurus, is food and basic money. Money and food are the same thing, right? It's the basic material support you need to exist. The 6th house would take it a step further. It's the Virgo, which is sometimes depicted as a virgin holding some ears of wheat or corn. And so Virgo represents the skill with which we manipulate material resources, transform them. So, for example, if someone gives you a bunch of wheat, it's not really useful until you've sifted the wheat from the chaff, until you've ground it into flour and you've baked it.
Got to do the work.
Skill. So it's all about work and skill. And then Capricorn or 10th house would be then the most developed level of Artha, which would represent the in a sense, it represents one's mastery of the earth element, that is developed from these previous stages and then is then manifested as a type of social status. It's like the respect we gain from a career well executed, no matter what that is. Even if you're a street sweeper, if you've done your whole life diligently, there's a certain respect you gain from that. That respect you gain for being a person who's fulfilled their duties and how you earn your daily bread through that relates to Capricorn. At its highest level, it represents, let's call it the mayor or the president. The mayor or the president doesn't worry about, have I got enough money to eat? Can I get a job? They walk into the restaurant and they get the food for free because they're so important, right? So that's that level of commanding control of the material element because of your status and stature. Then we have the what are called the Kama, not karma, Kama, K-A-M-A, Kama houses.
Mm-hmm.
And Kama means desire. So the Kama houses are the 3rd, 7th, and 11th, and they correspond to Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And so Gemini is the most basic, or 3rd house is the most basic version of that, right? It's the most basic Kama or short-term desire. It means I want this thing right in front of me, and I want it now. Like, in other words, I want to, for example, have a sip of my tea. This is not a long-term life goal. If I can only have it by the time I'm 70, it's useless. It's now or not, right? So the 3rd house is the short-term desire. It's the courage and the prowess with which we go out, the early bird that catches the worm. I want this and I want it now. That's the 3rd house type of Kama. The 7th house or Libra represents, literally, when they refer to Kama Sutra, right? Kama, the 7th house is the mate. It's the other. It's the house that's opposite the 1st house. When you look opposite you and you see your equal, your match, you might say, whether it's like a good match or you're meeting your match and as a challenge. Basically, the 7th house represents the desire for the other, the mating desire. And so the Kama Sutra literally means the book that helps you fulfill the Kama of the 7th house. Then the 11th house is our longer term life goals, right? Our longer term desires. So perhaps you can see in what I've said here is that it's not just that the 12 houses are divided into 4 groups that represent these 4 M's of life. Each one of those groups has 3 representatives, and each one tells us about a different aspect of. In fact, the whole story shows us the evolution of the mastery of that particular aim of life.
Wow.
And so the last one is Moksha, which is often translated as, which corresponds, by the way, to the water signs. We could call them the water houses, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. And Moksha is often described as spiritual liberation or final liberation. And basically these houses, 4th, 8th, and 12th, corresponding to Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, represent where we connect with that which is beyond this world. Okay. And so basically Cancer is the 4th house is the first one. It's the mother. You could call it the womb. It's like the womb is the gateway between that other world, that reservoir of souls, that mysterious place where we all come from before we were born, into this world. Okay. Scorpio, or the 8th house, would in some respects represent the exit out of this world. Scorpio's the 8th house is associated to some extent with death. And the 12th house, which is the last house, right, is the house where all things go back to source, you might say. All the droplets surrender their separate identity and merge back into this oceanic state. Now, in astrology, whether it's Western or Vedic.
And what's that last sign?
Pisces.
Pisces,
Or the 12th house, the final sign.
The fish.
The fish in the ocean, exactly. And so this is why the symbol of the ocean is very apt there, right? It's this limitless, vast unity where nothing is specific. And, of course, I could be digressing slightly, but there's also a great, if you want to understand the sign, reflect on the meaning of the sign opposite it. So, for example, Pisces as the sign that represents this great, vast cosmic soup, you might say, right, which everything has come dissolved back into this great unity. The opposite sign to that is Virgo, which is the sign of greatest specific separation of particulars.
Wow, complete opposite in sense.
It's like all of the polarities work this way. So I wanted to add that with the Moksha houses, the 4th, 8th, and 12th, both Western and Vedic astrology consider the 8th and 12th to be somewhat difficult houses. There are things that happen in those houses, or those houses relate to things in life that are not that comfortable. So, for example, in the 8th house, we can experience fear, right? That's why, by the way, Scorpio, the 8th house, is the sexual organs, which we always cover, or it represents, our vulnerability. It represents things that are secret, things that we, the 12th house, although it can represent the bliss of surrendering to the whole, can also represent a type of paralysis, right? Now, there's one Indian mystic once said that moksha is the dissolution of your delusion. Okay, and so the point I'm wanting to get to here is that some of the 8th and the 12th houses, they represent things that aren't comfortable in this world. Mm-hmm. But they can open our eyes for that very reason to things that are deeper than this world. Mm-hmm. In other words, I remember once at the Theosophical Society many years ago, attending a talk by a blind man from Kenya, and the title of his talk was "The Ways to God." And it was a fascinating lecture because he was just one point after the other was all kinds of catastrophes and calamities that bring you closer to God. And so, the point here is that sometimes you have to have as long as everything in this world stays comfortable and convenient for you, you will not be particularly interested in or aware of or inclined to engage with that which lies beyond this world. So,
for we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Excuse me?
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. So like what we can't see doesn't necessarily mean it's not there and it's not going on. This is a spiritual battle that we're all in.
And it's this particular realm of that which is invisible, even things like angels or demons of the afterlife, the great reservoir that souls come from, and all these different hidden aspects of life that relate to this water element and the moksha houses. And so basically, this is just one example. It's certainly not the only or primary way in which a birth chart provides us with, in a sense, a map of how the person, maybe it's a better way to put it than karma, but I'm going to use that term here, how the person's karma or how their psyche's very unique constitution gives them a unique way of connecting with certain areas of life. And when an astrologer is able to gain some insight into that, it can become possible to help people understand their patterns, and help them find pathways to self-actualization that is authentic for them as an individual. Because what self-actualization looks like for one person is not the same as for the other.
Sorry, I was just having a conversation, and I found, I don't know if you guys have found this as well, that a lot of people that I speak to about childhood, because I remember from a very early age, I remember from, I've got memories from being before the age of 1, and I can remember lots of things all the way through. But when I speak to my friends, a lot of people can't remember this and can't remember that. And some people can't even remember it until like their teenage years, which they've even blotted a lot of that out. So a lot of people that are suffering and going through these sorts of trauma, one way to cope, which is actually what was happening in World War II, that what they were all doing was that MK Ultra mind control, which was how to shatter the personalities. So it's been incorporated somehow into our everyday lives, where we brush it under the carpet. We go into freeze, fight, or flight mode, and the freeze mode is the brush under the carpet mode. So, and the disassociation is it's not there. So when it's not there, you can get on with your day.
Sure.
So it's funny that you were mentioning that, and I was having that conversation with my friend, because I was saying, so we keep repeating the same process. So it's, say for example, we keep living in the same repeated pattern over and over again, and we sit back and we go, okay, don't bark, fella. Shh, 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 shh. Sorry. So we keep going over this repeated pattern.
Don't worry about it, Dani. Carry on.
I might have to mute myself for a sec. If she could.
That's all right.
No worries.
So we keep going over in this repeated pattern over and over again, and we wonder, and we're like, what? We're wondering why. Then you try to remember the first time you ever experienced that mistake that you keep making, and you can't, because you've something inside of you has said, well, we'll bury that for protection, but now you need it so that you break the cycle.
Yeah, well, that's like unconscious, isn't it? A lot of people can't access that unless you come and see me.
Well, no, you can, because what you can do is you can jog people's memory. So you can say to them, okay, well, you remember your family home. Try and remember your bedroom. Remember your favorite toy. Remember the bathroom. What do you remember in the bathroom? What tiles did you have? Did you have a garden? Did you have any flowers in your garden? Did you have any pets? You ask these questions, and it jogs certain memories.
But sometimes the unconscious purposely hides stuff, so it doesn't matter what.
Yeah, of course. But the person has to be ready.
I'm not sure if we're digressing a bit here.
The person has to be ready. So when they want to stop doing the thing that they keep doing, well, you say, well, what have you hidden in the past that you can't remember that triggered this?
Yeah. Well, looking at a birth chart, it's often possible to identify what I'm tempted to call complexes, for want of a better word. And what I mean by the word complex is just like a particular deeply ingrained way of responding to circumstances, a particular deeply ingrained way of the person viewing themselves or viewing the world. And sometimes the reason for that might lie in certain events in their early life. And sometimes in the course of engaging with these archetypal patterns or themes in the person's life, they might at some point be ready to shift into a fuller awareness of it, at which time it might well happen that these suppressed memories, for example, might then spontaneously emerge. So I totally get that some people do bury or suppress these things as that might have happened in their life as a type of survival mechanism. And in the course of astrology's guided narrative, you might say, about certain themes, it can touch on and release some of these locked up.
It's interesting you say this, Richard, because this is like the therapy side of it, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yes. What you do, it's like where you can actually, help people unravel stuff. So I was going to say to you, actually, what sort of people, what do people generally come to you to find out? Do they just want sort of like to see where their strengths are going forward, or like what you've just been talking about?
I remember when I was starting out with astrology and starting to get somewhere with it, I realized that there are certain pitfalls that are very easy to fall into in this field, because people who don't know much about it might sometimes think that its primary purpose is to predict the future and things like this. And also many people are kind of skeptical about it, but curious, and so you could sometimes find yourself in a situation where people have paid you to either entertain them or amaze them or whatever it might be, or confirm their assumptions about things. I remember early on deciding that I really want this astrology to help people and to be useful. I don't want to be a clown for hire, so to speak, who's kind of just
you're like a therapist in a sense.
No, well, exactly.
Well, yeah, definitely.
And so you see, the thing is, I've been quite fortunate that for some years now, a lot of my clientele has come from a particular psychologist who works with people who then come to me kind of knowing what they want to deal with, knowing what they want to work with, often working with her on a specific issue. From time to time, she might sit in on a consultation, rarely, but sometimes that happens. And so I feel for the most part, the people that come to see me understand that the aim is not to amaze them. The aim is they understand that I have let's call it like a bit of an X-ray tool to understand certain ways their psyches work, and that helps me to, I suppose, do I think what many psychologists do, but I have the benefit of this let's call it these X-ray goggles, you might say, and so I can kind of help them. I don't, although I will take into consideration what people tell me, what they ask about. Okay, I'm not completely dependent on that for information about what's going on. And when I've worked with people over a period of time, there comes a point where I have raised enough things about their life that I couldn't have known through any way, that they start to develop a trust in that I'm not just winging it, right? And then they also aren't requiring of me or attempting to get me to sort of prove myself to them. And so basically I feel that what I do is a type of life coaching, you might say. I try to, in this example that I gave with the 4 aims of life, we all have to engage with our mission in life, our Dharma, our material needs, our Artha. We all have desires, whether they're short-term or long-term or whatever. We all have desires and they need some fulfillment. And we also have a relationship to the invisible world. And so to use this as an example, a birth chart helps me to help my clients sort of navigate their way through life, understanding their unique potentials. And so that's essentially, what I do. But of course, I've not all clients come with the same, exactly the same intentions. But I feel that for the most part, the clients that come to me have realistic expectations, and we have a very constructive engagement.
I was going to say as well, in India, it's viewed differently. You were saying earlier on, so like people who go in India probably wouldn't be going for some form of entertainment as such, like they might do here.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very interesting you raised that, because I went to India, I forget, was it 2010 or 11, I think, for the first time. And I'd been studying Vedic astrology for about 15 years by that time. I was pretty sure I knew how it worked, but I hadn't yet been to India, and I hadn't yet engaged with actual astrologers in India and gotten it from the horse's mouth to confirm for me that the way I see it is the way it really works. And so I went on this, let's call it astro pilgrimage to. I, by the way, have never paid an astrologer to do a reading for me, other than in India, to pick their brains.
Yeah.
And so when I was there, I realized, firstly, that I got a reassuring confirmation that we were reading from the same map. But I also became aware that there are really significant cultural differences that, and I hadn't realized just quite the extent to which I had developed a more psychological language in my interpretation of the Vedic chart than is typical in India. Now, that doesn't mean that I have in any way made anything up. It's totally, again, implicit in that, even in
interpretation,
Indian,
isn't it?
Well, exactly. It's how you frame it, how you deliver it. And even in India, for example, it's not like a stock standard. It's not like every Indian astrologer does the same job with it. But what I want to get to is that, believe it or not, many people would think that in India, the type of astrology that would be practiced there would be more spiritual or something along those lines. Now, look, there's a lot of deep spiritual awareness in that culture and in that country and so on. But in some respects, I was surprised in India how almost materialistic the approach was, because it was like, look, when exactly am I going to sell this house? And how is my money looking? Am I marrying? Exactly when am I marrying? And now I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those questions, because they understand in India that astrology can help with these things. But I realized that there's actually in the West, and again, I'm sort of generalizing. There's many exceptions, both in the West and in India around this. But in the West, people have, with astrology at least, have tended to approach it in a far more psychological way, as a path to self-inquiry. And it's not that isn't true in India, but the cultural differences are quite significant. And I actually personally believe that if you're going to practice Vedic astrology in the West, you should ideally not do it the way it is done in India for Indian people, because there are significant cultural differences. And I think that even in India, that will be changing in modern times as the culture there becomes more, let's say, global, and where there's inevitably cross-cultural cultural cross-pollination, and because we're being exposed to yoga and to Indian philosophy and Jyotish, they're also being exposed to, well, not just the negative side of Western culture, also many of the positive aspects. So that's another interesting point, right? Because astrology, whether it's Western or Vedic, ultimately has to clothe itself in new language for the times. But the essence never changes. The essential
has to appeal to the market.
Well, there's not the you could say that, but not so much appeal to the market, addressed rather, I would say, the need of the market. But the essence never changes, although the specific the superficial clothing does.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy, actually.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Wow.
I was going to say something, and it's all connected, isn't it? Because we're talking about vibration, frequency, we're talking about the planetary alignments, but our DNA. So if you think about it, that's also notes, letters, and it's all interchangeable. And what was I going to say? I've been waiting to say it for ages now.
Can I just run with that little prompt there, because that you mentioned DNA is to me really interesting, because it's very significant astrologically.
It's a map. Right?
Yeah, well, exactly. I was about to say the same.
We contain like terabytes and terabytes and terabytes.
Right.
So all of our ancestors, right? So what they say is junk DNA is everything that our ancestors were ever good at, right? It's all encoded somewhere in our DNA. Okay, we can access that if so, like, I don't know, maybe for example, when you were little, you like to draw. I love to draw Victorian dresses. I love to make them tailor made, and I like to do wedding dresses and make it all like done properly, like Victorian. Anyway, it was good for me when I was 5, but this was an obsession, and then you find out that previously an ancestor was a tailor for a town,
Right.
And it's all encoded in our DNA. So where people can see that all of our illnesses are hereditary and they're all genetic, that's encoded in our DNA, generational. So why can't all our skill sets be stuck in there as well? So
Right.
that's what I just wanted to add.
What your reference to DNA to me is interesting, because astrology is based on this principle that the microcosm and macrocosm mirror each other and are synchronized. And so the solar system is the macrocosm,
And we are the microcosm.
But we could say that what we are to the solar system, a cell in our body is to us, or what the solar system is to us, we as a whole being are to each cell in our body. So every cell in our body understands, when you use the word map there, Dani, the DNA in a way serves every cell to understand the broader whole blueprint that it's part of. And if it wasn't for that, there wouldn't be order, there wouldn't be cosmos, there wouldn't be coherence. And so basically, your birth chart is in many respects your own individual
DNA,
solar system DNA.
Yeah, like a fingerprint.
Yeah.
It's unique.
And exactly, and it keeps you in touch with, in communication with, responsive to the macrocosm. And if that wasn't happening, there would be a problem, just like in your body. It's actually we take it for granted that so many billions of little cells in our bodies are all being born and doing their thing and dying in just the right time, in just the right speed, and just the right way to keep this order. That would be impossible if everyone was doing each little cell was doing its own thing. And this is very important, right? Because we, in our modern sort of more secular worldview, we tend to think of ourselves as individual human beings, as free agents. Anything could happen any old time, as if nothing really regulates us, right? But it's very, very far from the case. One of the things that astrology reveals to you between the lines of all of this is how you cannot be separated from the universe. How, it's not just an idea that sounds good. It can become a very visceral knowing. Is when you've worked with this astrology for a time, and you've seen, for example, by looking at astrological life cycles, how many specific events and details of your life have been explained by by this relationship you have to the solar system.
It's interesting you talk about that, because we had a guest on like a month ago, and she did like past life regression, and she talks about contracts, and it's just interesting that what time you were born and where you were born and all those things and all those measurements give you like a map of your life. You haven't even lived yet, to some extent. Like she talked about a contract. I don't know if that's connected.
Well, in Indian astrology, they differentiate between 3 degrees of karmic momentum, we might say. In other words, there are certain things that are indicated to be sort of fixed, all right? And by that is implied that whether for good or bad, right? So you've either messed up in a particular way so consistently for so long that there's no getting away from the consequence of that in this particular life, or you've done so many wonderful things so consistently that absolutely nothing on this in heaven and earth can stop you from amazing blessings coming as a result. And then there's sort of the next level, which is sort of not too fixed, but somewhat fixed. In other words, you've developed certain talents in a past life, but maybe not to a very high degree. So when you'd come into this world like a prodigy. You'd like at the age of 3 or 4, you're doing amazing things, and that doesn't happen by accident. And then you have let's call it the lightest level of that karmic momentum, where there's certain very subtle tendencies that have been, for good or bad, little gifts that have been slightly developed that's going to need nurturing to grow into something, or little problems that could be nipped in the bud, or they could develop into something. And so the relevance here to what you were talking about there, Dave, is that in a very basic way, in terms of past lives, in theory at least, the astrological chart can kind of show us where the really strong momentum lies, where the sort of medium level momentum is, and where very light tendencies are. And that we see, well, there's lots of ways that gets communicated in the chart. And one of them is certainly when a certain distinct theme is showing up in every place it can. It gets repeated emphatically, and so from that we can't necessarily know, okay, well, you were Cleopatra in your past life, and or whatever. It's specific detail people might find exciting, but we can get a sense of the key, it's like the key qualities you've been developing for a long time. And so, for example, in a birth chart, the fifth house is in Vedic astrology associated with what they call Purva Punya, which means past life credit. So for example, if you have Mercury in the fifth house, Mercury is the planet of communication, intellect, basic education, etc. You've got Mercury in the fifth house. You come into this world, you're very clever. You don't even study at school. You just know the stuff. You like puzzles and complicated word games. You love it. It's fun for you. Other people are like, oh, I can't understand that. This is going to be difficult. But for you, it's play, right? So sometimes this is an example of how a chart might sometimes enable us to see when a person comes into this life with certain faculties and skills and talents already very fully developed.
Love that. I love that, actually. Very interesting. And
very much so.
I had a little look at my chart, very basic, obviously, because I went online to get a free one.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Dani knows me well in the sense of details. Yeah, and there was a bit there that doesn't do details, and for me, I'd like to do details more. So would there be like a point in time where I might have that opportunity where everything's aligned, that I could have I got it all wrong, sort of thing?
I don't know if I missed something there. When you talk about the details, what do you mean there?
Details of life. When I was reading my interpretation of what time I was born, there was one, I can't remember what house it was in or whatever, any of that. But it was talking about details, a lack of not very good with details.
Not paying attention to details.
Right.
That sort of stuff, and that sort of rang a bell with me. So, how could I take it? Like, it's telling me that, but how could I take advantage so that I could?
Yeah. All right. Now, look, of course, without looking at your chart, firstly, I can't confirm whether or not I agree with that.
Yeah, of course.
Diagnosis, if you like, okay, and also to what extent it's, whether it qualifies as what I was describing earlier as the really fixed karma, or if it's just a little bit of a tendency and so on. But what's really interesting, I often say, our assets are our liabilities, and what I mean by that is like our talents. Our outstanding talents come from the very same place that our weaknesses come from. So, for example, if you've got a very super strong Mars, take it like Hitler, right? Yeah, you have a talent for war.
Yeah.
Not such a great talent for being nice, right? Or for let's call it homemaking, right?
Gentle.
For gentleness or what have you. And maybe this is a simple example, but so I guess what I'm trying to basically say here is that, okay, it all depends on the specifics of a chart, but every chart, every major pronounced configuration in a chart is going to firstly stamp itself very much on that person's character. It's going to be the reason for some of their main attributes. And when you understand the full spectrum of possible manifestations of that energy, basically you can help guide people to make the most of the valuable part of that complex, while recognizing the inherent failings, if you like, or pitfalls. Now, life cycles are very important, because it could indeed happen that there are certain cycles in life that either help you to be released from that restriction, at least for a time, and maybe for that time you might have some insights about this aspect of yourself that might help you in future. It'll still be an attribute, like, you know, if you're born with that kind of distinct personality trait, it's never going to completely go away. But, you know, there are many people who, particularly I find by the time they reach sort of like their 40s and 50s, perhaps, and even without astrology, they've become aware enough of some of their talents and vices, if
Failings.
you like, that failings, that by that time they've already decided to work on those things that need work, and they've usually also learned to recognize and maybe take advantage of and leverage the skills that they have. Now the thing is, you know, with astrology, there's also, you know, in Vedic astrology in particular, there's something called dashas. Now, dashas are planetary periods when a particular planet will light up for several years at a time. And it's quite, Western astrology doesn't, generally speaking, do life cycles that way. I won't get too technical here, but the thing is, in Vedic astrology, sometimes a particular planet and everything it's involved within the chart, right? Every planet, no planet's just sitting there by itself. It's part of a.
It's like in an alignment.
Connected,
it's in a complex web of connections with other planets and houses.
You saw that in mine. Do you remember?
I can't specifically remember, but this is probably just a routine thing.
There was an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn.
Yeah, okay, yes, that's in your natal chart. So, for example, like in Dani's case, she's got I think a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, and so that will always be affecting her. But there will come a certain time in her life when Jupiter for 16 years and then Saturn for 19 years will cause that particular part of the chart to really step forward as the main feature. So, for example, coming back to your question, Dave, like, for example, if you've got some challenges with detail, etc. Well, you know, there might be some specific times when that particular part of your chart lights up for a whole,
of course,
decade, and that'll be your opportunity to confront its
and that's basically what I was asking. Really, there'll be an opportunity. There will be a point in time where everything's in the right place or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I must say, as much as I'm an astrologer, I would there's a lot that passes for astrology, especially if you find it free on the internet, that I would be take with a big tablespoon of salt.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I would assume that anyway. Obviously, some people might not like.
Look, it's a bit of a pity, because you see, astrology is really potentially very, very reliable and accurate. But what's also happened in more modern times, right? There's been a lot of, like, you know, as we've discovered asteroids and all kinds of other things, people have started adding all kinds of new elements to birth charts. And I think, you know, I think some people think superficially that this means progress, but actually it made things more complicated, confusion to it. So this is, as you know, sometimes I've wondered lately in my practice, I mean, is it a good or a bad sign that it's become simpler and simpler and simpler? You know? And
that actually, I mean, with the detail thing, there's a part of that with my details, because I don't like too much information in it. Keep it simple, you know. But it does affect me sometimes, definitely.
Well, who knows? Maybe it's not a problem.
It's not really a problem.
And you know,
occasionally it can be.
It is when you're trying to get from somewhere A to B.
Well, to give you an example, you know, in Vedic astrology,
and we end up having to go round and round about 3 times.
Yeah, but I like going roundabouts.
And we say, take the first left, and he goes, is it right? And he says, no, it's the first left. And then you get, no, that was it.
You know, for example, the planet Mercury, which represents analytical detail, right? It doesn't do well in the sign Pisces. Okay.
Right.
Now, when a person has Mercury in Pisces, in a worst case scenario, it can make a person's mind a little bit fuzzy, but they're often also very interested in spiritual subjects and so on. But what I want to mention here is Einstein, for example, in his Vedic astrology chart had Mercury in Pisces. And, you know, he didn't speak for the first few years. He wasn't like, you know, he wasn't immediately, obviously, a genius. In fact, like in these early years, there was a bit of concern, like, is he clever enough to speak even, right? But then later on, he was able to engage intellectually with concepts that are so vast and abstract that most people can't even start to go there. And so what I'm trying to get at here is, like, not everybody's who's got Mercury in Pisces can do what Einstein did, but Einstein could only do what he did because he had Mercury in Pisces. And so there's certain potentials, like, say, for example, you're a little bit like Mercury in Pisces, like, even if you don't have Mercury in Pisces, maybe it's in the 12th house, whatever. So yes, you might drive Dani crazy when you're going around roundabouts and not knowing which turn to take, but it might also be one reason why you can intellectually understand ideas that are very abstract and kind of make connections between things that would otherwise not be possible. So sometimes the reason for not being good at one particular thing is actually why you're good at something else.
Yeah. And sometimes we're meant to unintentionally trigger people because it gives them an opportunity to react to the situation in a different way, Dani, doesn't it?
Well, that's a whole different conversation.
All right, I'm just going to go round and round and round about. And you know what? When you ask me to navigate, I'm just going to go, la, la, la. That's it.
Well, maybe one day we can look at your two charts and get to the bottom of this.
My chart one day, Richard. But let's put some of your stuff. We've been in such solid conversation. Like, for instance, your courses that you're doing, which starts Sunday. If you want to talk about that.
Yes, I'm actually starting this 6-week course on Sunday, which I call Advanced Astrology for Beginners. And this is really designed to enable people who really don't have much astrological knowledge to learn techniques that are practical, very usable. And why it excites me is because having spent a lot of time myself, like many other people who learned astrology, having spent a lot of time on various rabbit holes that weren't going to the core of things, I realized that this course is designed to take you as fast as possible to the techniques that actually work. And this is primarily those geometric methods of Western astrology. So this course basically teaches you not only to identify key attributes in people's personalities, but very, very excitingly, transits, how you look at the bus timetable of the planet, of the solar system. I call it a bus timetable because that's how difficult it is to read it, right? Because you're just finding out who's coming when.
Yeah.
And then when you learn to read that bus timetable and see when it's coming to your number, it's bingo, 15, that I've got a call from Mars, so to speak, on my Mercury. So I'm going to be having some energetic and feisty communication right about now. That is learning to master that technique, learning how to calculate that and formulate interpretations of these life cycles is the ultimate goal of this course. And if you've learned to do that, you won't even need any other astrology. Just life. You just watch what happens, and life will teach you the rest.
That's so cool.
And by the way, there's no actual fee for this course. It's by donation.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Is it obviously online, Richard? Yeah.
Yes, it's on Zoom.
And there's going to be people watching this in a month's time. You know, like, are you going to be doing this?
Well,
your website. Do you often offer these things just so that
to be honest, I don't very often do group courses, which is why I'm.
You're giving it a blast to see what
exactly.
Yeah, you're giving it a whirl.
I have done them. I have done them often over the years, but and this is also one reason why I haven't even. I was originally going to charge £70 per person for this, but I just thought I don't even want to think about that side. I'm not even interested in that. I'd like this to be accessible to people who are interested in it. So the only condition I have, apart from making some contribution, whatever it is that people who sign up for it approach it with sincerity.
Yes,
this is not. It's not for free because it's useless,
No.
or therefore just fun and games. It's quite a serious thing. It'll take some effort,
Yeah.
but there's a lot that people can gain from it.
So what?
But I do teach people privately, by the way, and
Okay.
particularly people who've already learned quite a bit of astrology. I
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
a number of private students.
What sort of time does this start on Sunday, Richard?
It's 4:00, I believe.
In the afternoon, yeah?
Yes.
What, this
Yeah.
Sunday?
Yeah, this Sunday, and that'll be the first of 6 consecutive Sunday lessons, and they will also be recorded, and I will send the recordings out to everyone within about a day or so of that. So some people are not going to be able to make 1 or 2 of them,
Yeah.
and so that doesn't mean you shouldn't enroll if you can't make them all. I do recommend being present, because you know how it is. Even if you had like a whole bunch of recordings of something, you're just not going to be disciplined, and it's something valuable about showing up for the scheduled lesson, being there, and there's also opportunity for some direct interaction and
Q&A.
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So by all means, maybe you're interested.
Well, it's
Yeah.
I don't know. That's next weekend, isn't it? The festival.
The Hill Festival's next Sunday, yes.
Not this Sunday.
Not this Sunday, but next Sunday, yes. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Shrewsbury.
Yeah.
The showground.
I'm going to look into that, Richard. I am working that Sunday, but I might be back by then.
Look, like I said, there are some people who tell me they can't make them all.
Indian connection, I like.
Right. Well. And I'll be sending out those recordings, and the things that I'll be teaching with this course, right, will give you the foundation that you would need anyway if you wanted to get into Vedic astrology. Before you could get into any of the details that are specific to Vedic astrology, you'd need to have these basic foundational principles about how to basically see what's going on in a birth chart and where it comes from, and so on. So this is very, very important foundational basics. And I normally do this kind of, sometimes I've presented this kind of course over 3 or 4 sessions. I've decided to make it 6 this time to make sure there's enough time to do it really thoroughly,
That's really good.
And so even some of my more advanced students are going to be attending, because I think towards the end, some of the things we'll be dealing with would not be so a beginner level.
Yeah. And it's interesting, some people that when they're being established in it, they can steer away from sort of basic stuff, and it's good sometimes to revisit the basic stuff.
No, I think when people understand or are quite experienced with astrology, it's a little bit, I think a little bit of like, some sort of Tai Chi master who understands that there's nothing at all.
It gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly, but
like music.
You can go right back to the basics you started with on the first day, and it's still new and still fresh and still deep, and so this is why I've had, some of my most, I feel, enlightened students have always recognized that it's valuable to sit in again with classes and groups that are doing the basics, because they often find there's some little subtle
something
way
that
I might
missed.
frame something, or the way somebody else might frame something, that gives them a new insight. And sometimes, even though that very same thing had been said in previous lessons, they didn't have the ears to hear at that particular moment, to recognize the value of that particular thing. And yeah, so it's for basics, it's for beginners rather, but and dealing with basics and foundational stuff. But in my opinion, it's not superficial. It's I'm very excited about it.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'd like to come.
Well, look, I think we're going to wrap it up now, sure. Richard, Dani. It's been really interesting. A subject that sort of goes over my head, and you've given me a bit more understanding of it.
Right. Glad to hear it.
No, absolutely. I'm sure other
Thank
people
you for coming.
And as I say, people are going to be watching this on the record as well. We have had people popping in and out watching it. We didn't get any questions tonight, but never mind. So
well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure to chat with you guys, and thank you so much for this opportunity to connect with your community.
I'd like to get you back on talking about the I can't even say it. What was it, Dani? The farming.
Permaculture.
Permaculture, yeah. Get
Oh,
you
yes.
back on, talk about that. That'd be amazing because that's important as well. But
Happily.
I'd like you to stay on for a minute, Richard, Dani, like we normally do. But I will end the broadcast now for the
Sure.
As long as you don't mind me having a lavatory break.
That's fine. Don't worry about that. So look, thank you
Thanks.
everyone for watching, and thank you to the people who are going to watch the recording. If you get a chance, and you could possibly subscribe, like, and share the channel, because we like to get this information out there to the masses, show them what's available to them in an alternative way. Will be good. So, bye everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Brilliant.
I need a wee.